They want to make an apology? Google Docky!
After a very rough 7.1 at the end of an already harsh content drought, general opinion on the game was very low entering 7.2. But we can't forget this was the patch set to save us all. Did it do that? Well, while it initially appeared to have the makings of a good patch, it missed the mark in a few crucial ways that, over time, have significantly harmed many players' faith in the game, perhaps irreversibly. Today, I'll be going back through all of the content added to provide a better picture on why the situation is so dire. Before I begin talking about any of this though, I would like to preface that any of this content can be fun, including that which is bad. I even had a great deal of fun myself. However, the subject of this review, as with all of my content, is the design quality of Final Fantasy XIV, as close as possible to an objective level. This is a completely different subject from anyone's subjective opinion on whether or not the content is fun, so a counter-argument that conflates the two is flawed from the moment of its conception. Keep that in mind as you listen, as it will be relevant. The first thing in the patch, and the highlight of it for me, was the Cruiserweight Normal tier. Now that we have the second tier, I think it's safe to say that Arcadian is the most invested I've ever been in a raid theory story-wise. Maybe even any story in the whole game, honestly. I've gone on record glazing light heavyweight, gameplay-wise, both normal and savage. But before we get to Cruiserweight gameplay, I especially wanted to express appreciation for the story, since a lot of story discourse so far this expansion has been about the MSQ. I think a large part of that love is firstly that Arcadian comes closer than the MSQ to what Dawntrail initially promised us. A story in which the Warrior of Light plays a major part with a new cast of characters and low-stakes, high-emotion story based on their grounded problems. I'll not go into specifics for the sake of spoilers, but I enjoy how easily the story can balance being a typical wrestling script and being commentary on abuse of the talent, while being very simple and very well paced. None of this I expected from a Final Fantasy XIV story. Even while not being a wrestling fan, this story does a lot for me. I also enjoy that the characterization is done far more smoothly and effectively in so much less screen time than the actual MSQ. But onto gameplay. First is Dancing Green. Beneath the great spectacle lies a solid and inoffensive, but unremarkable and uninventive fight. While I found it enjoyable, they absolutely took the meme of low end is nothing but hovering cleaves and turned it up to 11, even more egregiously than light heavyweight M3. Damn near the entire fight of them. Bright and multicolored, everything is also very hard on the eyes, and in the case of Savage, it makes creation of diagrams for the fight very difficult. If I end up releasing guides for Savage of this fight, I'm writing this part of the video before I even started that, so I have no clue how in the world I managed it. Anyway, yes, this is very easily the weakest fight of the set. The music syncing perfectly with the mechanics is about the only redeeming quality. Next is Sugar Riot, who brought us interesting new mechanics with minimal tutorialization, brought together very well. One thing that especially stood out to me was the landscape mode used. Desert came first, and from there mechanics were fairly standard, but the other is a riverscape, which is more than just a skin on the arena or a safe puddle, as the middle of the arena actually changes depth, and I can't name a single other time this was done, so it really stood out to me as a statement of high effort, if nothing else. Outside of that, the way the mechanics overlap felt very satisfying, which is not something I often find myself thinking. The top spot, of course, goes to Brute Abominator, a fight that remained thrilling and surprising every passing second in both gameplay and story. The arena changes were all great, and the moment I saw ads I instantly thought, oh, so that's why they buffed everyone's AoE, pretty unsubtly, but it was in the same way you'd point out lines on the floor, because you appreciate it. Just as I appreciate just about everything this fight did. Last is Howling Blade, and while I appreciated the speed of this fight a lot and found it interesting, about halfway he'll do the standard adds and duty gauge into huge raid wide into arena change into phase 2 setup. But after that, it feels like the only thing that changes is he does the same mechanics faster. Even though those mechanics are fun, this fight suffers from very clear "they saved the good parts for Savage" syndrome. So I can't in good faith rank it highly, can't in good faith rank it above any of the actually well-designed fights in the list. The Savage tier, on the other hand, I have absolutely nothing good to say about. I wanted to like this tier so badly given the innovative risks taken and the fun normal modes, but none of them paid off, and every fight is objectively poorly designed in one way or another. I know I'm going against the grain here because this tier was well received, but stick with me and you'll see how Aelzier's faith leads the land dry. I'll start strong with M5S, for which my complaint is mechanical responsiveness and snapshotting. In a huge step back from light heavyweight's well-timed true-to-animation snapshot, M5S marks the start of a giant leap backwards on that front, worse than anything we've seen before. With multiple mechanics needing extremely fast and precise movement like Snap Twist and Arcade Ignite, this will always be a problem even far beyond the impact of ping. I'll have moved out of the mechanic well in advance, even on everyone else's screens too, but I still take the damage. M5S is easily the second to worst fight I've done on content. There are some fine enough ideas, but the technical stuff weighs everything down to the point that I'm willing to call it all bad, because it is bad in implementation, and I can't think of any real reason to have walked back from light heavyweight's improvement. For M7S, my complaint is no waymarks until after you've cleared. I'm sure everyone who was there remembers the whole P7S situation. The accepted markers for that fight required plugin use. They weren't actually possible to place before the fight, as the arena changed midway and markers were needed on the changed part. So they changed the fight so that it ended with the changed arena, allowing the markers to be placed legitimately. This was praised as a solution, despite ultimately accomplishing nothing. The people who were actively doing the fight still had original set of illegitimate markers and would have continued using them regardless of this change. And the people progging the fight without those markers would continue to not be able to have them until they cleared. The latter case is what I'd like to focus on, as it repeats itself with M7S. You can place markers on P1 and P2's platforms, but not P3's, which just so happens to be the one people actually use markers for. My takeaway here is that Vocal Raiders and Abyssos misplaced their praise out of failing to see this gate flaw, leading to it being repeated this tier. For M8S, my complaint is no door boss. As I've said on record before, a lack of door boss being considered poor design goes far deeper than personal preference for two major reasons. The first is that it inherently necessitates an easier phase 2 in order to maintain Savage difficulty, and this is kinda what happened with M4S, and of course, or I wouldn't be talking about it, this fight. P2's pacing, quality, and difficulty take sharp nosedives, with many of the mechanics feeling like complete filler, almost akin to an EX trial. This bad P2 isn't just a bad P2, however, as lack of a door boss causes the fight to be viewed as one single entity that degrades over time. It effectively sours P1 too. When you think of the best final turn P2s, what do you think of? E8S P2? E12S P2? Maybe E12S P2? Regardless, to put it bluntly, you do not get final turn P2s of that difficulty or quality without the door boss and checkpoint between, because without them, the overall encounter would encroach on ultimate difficulty. I mean, hell, there's already an argument that those encounters are harder than some Legacy Ultimate, but if they didn't have their checkpoints, there would be no arguing that they aren't. Finally is M6S, which I saved for last because I regretfully can't be as specific as I'd like. The problems are so broad that it is best summarized as the fight just doesn't work. I'm not sure what it is about this fight, but it dials all of 14's technical problems to 100. I'll spare details for now, but when we get to the poor performance and server instability section later, most of the examples will be from M6S, and that is for a reason. All of it unites in such a way that causes the fight to be genuinely unplayable. I've seen many a static implode on this fight by no fault of their own, purely because when every pull has a DP, there's no hope of passing the tight DPS check on ads. However, I do think that even with technical stuff aside, it wouldn't fix the PF problem of people are just bad at it. I believe ads and raids should have been soft launched in some kind of other high-end thing, other than Savage, as a bulk of the issue is that the skill being tested is one that most raiders haven't trained at all, which, sure, is a skill issue, but it's only an issue because the game has trained its players into the belief that said skill isn't needed, which it was wrong to do, and should be criticized for. It's also a special kind of hell for casters in a not-so-shocking reversion to caster hostile design. Why, Square Enix? You were doing so well with light heavyweight. First is ads again, whoever would have fucking guessed, revealing that interruption on target death is still as nonsensically janky as it has ever been, and that we really need some kind of countermeasure. Be it place AoE like Bomb Toss, self-centered AoE like healers have, or even just AoEs that hit the middle point of all enemies automatically. Rabbit and heal. If you insist on continuing with caster hostile design, casters need to be doing significantly more damage than melee, categorically. River's phase is also significantly more RNG that I am willing to tolerate, with its worst patterns inducing significantly more movement, and during a burst, so there's a good chance your Pico just doesn't get the full ley lines ever. This would be considerably less problematic if the game wasn't built from its core around having static rotations. If jobs had more flexibility, design like this could thrive. Rabbit and heal. Enough about that though, because I think I'd rip my hair out if I had to think about that fight for even a moment longer. In short, while the Normals raid series was incredible and its story one of the best in the game, Savage was all misses. About a month later, we received Cosmic Exploration, which is new leveling and pinnacle content for tradecraft jobs, akin to Ishgardian Restoration. However, the launch was messy, and now that some time has passed, there really isn't a lot of this content anymore. Firstly, the first few base upgrades happened immediately, and succeeded first try on more populated worlds, leading many players to believe they were missing out on major content. After all, the base upgrades were marketed as the main thing, so even though it was just clicking on dirt piles for 40 minutes, you can't possibly expect those people to know because they missed it. And you can't expect them not to be upset because some people still trust Square Enix's marketing, as they aren't as jaded as you. What I believe to be more egregious, however, is that when unpopulated worlds failed their base upgrade, mech ops and red alerts were halted for 8 hours, implying that the fast completion was actually deliberate, and that development requirements are not scaled to world population, which are both just bad design. The short notice for base upgrades and red alerts is also extremely concerning. You get like 20 minutes for base upgrades and 5 for red alerts, meaning you have to effectively live on the moon if you ever want to catch either. People also had harsh criticism of the gameplay, particularly for Gatherers. Most A-rank missions are balanced around a full GP bar and cordials being ready going in. Revisit can't log, and the GP cooldown is awful, and cordials aren't in the Cosmocredit vendor. As a result, you spend more time waiting for GP to regenerate than actually doing missions, just to be cordial negative by the end anyway. It wasn't just the launch either though. Time wasn't as kind as we all hoped it would be. Once I realised all of the Fate upgrades were rover batteries, that was the final nail in the coffin for my interest in the format, and I resigned myself to, well, I've done one of them, that means I've done all of them, and I kinda just stopped bothering. I would also say that they thought way more about leveling than endgame, and it shows. Quest sync means that if I use my low stage relic, I'm not at the item level and therefore I can't complete basic missions. I am punished for being an endgame crafter due to quest sync. Server instability was also especially annoying here too. This will be a trend. All of this in combination led to the content dying far faster than anticipated. If we take Seraph for an example, they had easily several hundred players across all instances, which is very impressive for a Dynamis world, let's be real here. But now they can barely even muster 20, even at peak hours. And even beyond Seraph, you'll be seeing Upgrade Failed Up or Red Alert Alert PFs to try and get more people into the zone. We'll expect a drop off eventually, but it coming so soon makes me believe Square Enix designed this content expecting a lot more people to grind the 500k on all jobs, or even to continue participating beyond that. Especially seeing as the content kinda breaks with too few people. The easiest example beyond what we've already gone over is the mech ups have no scaling and are impossible with no pilot. Just straight up can't be done with the tiny amount of time you get. While you are given an NPC pilot if there are no player pilots, they can't actually contribute fate progress. And with the ground support contribution being so low, failure is all but guaranteed. You do still get the buff when failing though, so I guess that's something. Now to the missions, and I can't help but notice that the bulk of the content is designed around A rank. You don't need them for relics, but the game heavily pushes people towards them. There are more A rank missions than any other rank, and only A rank missions are weather limited. Not to mention, once base camp gets upgraded, it becomes more annoying to travel to the close D ranks due to the circular wall. Most of the progression is just making it easier to get to A ranks or adding more of them. But now that nobody plays the content, it literally plays itself. Minimum development pace with automatic progression if below it, and upgrade fates can only fail twice and will always complete on the third. It really makes me wonder if they knew this content would die so fast, and if they did, why waste dev time and resources on it? Or at the very least, why not have development progress faster? While it's possible that Cosmic won't die as fast in 7.3x, as it only happened this time due to Occult Crescent, I'd still like the fast death factor to be factored in the 7.4x and 7.5x of Cosmic. That leaves Occult Crescent, the flagship of the expansion, the field operation. At first glance it looks like it's going to be a lot of content, but it's a mile wide and an inch deep. As a result, this section is going to be the longest one yet, because not only were more things fucked up, it's also not as immediately obvious why they are fuck-ups. Before we get into that though, I'd like to call attention to the fact that only a very small minority of my viewers are actually subscribed. Subscribing is totally free, and for a channel as small as mine, every little bit of support helps. Ringing the bell to turn on notifications will also help you see my content more reliably, if you are so inclined. Occult Crescent has a very wide breadth of content, but the most natural place to start with is the first thing most people will do, leveling and character progression, which has been greatly diminished here. The primary issue is that fate and critical engagement, as well as Ethernet shards, are completely unaffected by knowledge level. This means that, other than minute 1 where you don't have the Ethernet shards yet, you can access all of the zone's content immediately. You can do the hardest things at level 1 and will struggle at the max level of 20. As a result, knowledge level feels like it serves no purpose beyond being a number that goes up. Both of the field lobs did this better. Eureka soul mobs become easier as you overleveled them, and Bozja had hard locks on the map to make up for the lack of this. OC doesn't either, which causes players to start out feeling strong as they can go anywhere and do anything. There is horizontal progression present in the form of phantom jobs, but that isn't particularly good either. I mean, sure, having 5 duty actions at once is cool and they're not consumable, which is a good change, but the actions themselves aren't particularly interesting and have minimal impact on job playstyle. To cover the broad strokes, while last actions and essences had minimal impact on a job's playstyle outside of a few exceptions, the main appeal was the ability to break role mold. A healer that effectively can't heal and a tank whose armor is as thin as paper but without damaging DPS, you can do that. A DPS or healer claiming main tank by voking off cooldown and having the defenses to back it up, or the evasion if you're inclined to do that instead, you can do that. A tank or DPS with more raw healing output than a healer could ever dream of at minimal cost to themselves, you can do that. Mix and match those for a build that excels when soloing, you can do that. Constantly rotate buff actions to be the best support, you can do that. Phantom jobs have nothing like this and are effectively just extra things to press. While the Gilsync Chemist allows you to buy your way in without having a healer, no Phantom job has enmity manipulation, so non-tanks tanking is off the table. And while the best DPS options are available to everyone, every role gets the same value, so in actuality all it does is make being a support less of a damage loss. As a result, Phantom jobs seem to be constantly and collectively assuming that the player is on a tank. The example I often see cited of Phantom jobs changing the base job's playstyle positively is Berserker's attempt at keeping HP low while not actually dying, synergizing well with Warrior's home gang. However, that isn't an example of how Phantom jobs, plural, can change a base job's playstyle, because it's the only occurrence of one doing so. I don't want to rain on your parade if you like Phantom jobs because of this combo, but like, of course you like the system if you like this combo. On a personal level, I did like Phantom jobs at first. During the first few days when I was on healers, mostly Scholar, and literally any addition to healer rotations marked a huge improvement, Cannoneer clicked first, as not only did it break the monotony of Broil, but it also increased damage and movement significantly. I later found enjoyment in Geomancer because taking deliberate damage became part of the optimization. Every fight became a question of how many avoidable hits I could survive and what mitigation I could use on myself to increase that. I tanked for a fair bit too, leveling my Chemist while playing Paladin and main healing a full party while doing so. Then, when I got bored of support and decided to try various DPS, I found that most of the jobs I liked on support didn't work on DPS. Can't take deliberate damage because I'll die due to lack of heals. Anything with extra GCDs would break the flow of my rigid by dev design rotation and cause significant misalignment. The only real options are Knight and Chemist until you have the heal and Freelancer, because you need the sustains to survive raid wide if you don't have a healer. And the reason it feels so bad is because those jobs don't bring anything except that sustain. Now that I've had some time to think Phantom jobs over, I've decided I don't truly enjoy any of them. Half of them are useless on one role or another, and the other half are useless in most situations regardless. That's not the only problem with Phantom jobs though. Every player who plays the content in any capacity will notice naturally that once you master a job, you are strongly incentivized to start over from level 1 with a new job. Each mastered job gives a stackable permanent 2.5% buff, damage and healing, which is enough to be essential while not being enough that every step can be felt. Every point of experience gained by a mastered job is a point not going into a new job with more skills and a point that isn't getting you closer to your next job mastery stack. As a result, if a player finds a job they love, they'll be grumbling and moaning in a few hours once they master it because they'll need to switch to something else and lose what they were having fun with. Which naturally means they can't make it matter which Phantom job you're using, seeing as you can't use it if you've maxed it. Naturally, yes, that means once you've maxed Knight and Chemist, you can't play DPS jobs anymore. And you spend more time on bad combos than good ones. I've spent pretty much the entire time between OC's release and this video's reading opinions on OC, and I've yet to see a single person who likes this system. However, I think the funniest part of how badly they fucked up copying from FF5 is because the problem I just addressed was fixed within FF5 itself, as they allow you to cross-class a skill from a different job, no matter what job you're actually on. Not to mention, Freelancer being a completely freeform job that can use any skill from other jobs is like the entire reason to have Freelancer as a job. I can't stress enough how disappointed I am that this didn't happen. The end result of the Phantom Job system is a situation where most players will either spend 100 plus hours grinding jobs they don't even like before getting the job. The end result of the Phantom Job system is a situation where players must choose between either spending 100 plus hours grinding jobs they may not even like before getting to play the job they do like again, or they have to play on a max job and feel themselves constantly losing experience that could be contributing to their permanent power. In short, Phantom Job kits are significantly more shallow than Logos or Lost Actions, and the system itself is significantly worse than that of FF5 from which it's derived. That's not all though, as even were those systems implemented better, that wouldn't do anything to address the everyday gameplay loop, which can be summed up as unending hunt trade. No, before you try to say this is part of the course, Bowser was nowhere near this bad about it. Let me explain. Fates spawn 30 seconds to a minute after the last one was killed, and CEs spawn about 3 minutes after. If you're thinking, well that would mean there's something up every moment, then you would be right. There is no downtime in Occult Crescent. Ever. Natural play that people not studying with guides intuit is to train between Cs and Fates at a breakneck pace, and that's not far off optimal. You go to the home base, wait for something to spawn, warp to it, kill it, warp back home, wait for the next thing, repeat until the heat death of the universe. This is further exacerbated by Return having no cooldown and the way that warps zone gameplay. Occult Crescent is fundamentally a square with a base aetherite at the top right you return to by using Return, and then Ethernet shards in the other 3 corners. Even the most remote, hidden locations are only a minute or amount away from their nearest shard. What this means is that you press Return after literally every fight since it immediately takes you to the aetherite, and then whenever the next thing spawns, you can immediately warp to it. When everyone can return every time, nothing is ever out of reach, contributing to the overstimulation. This is bad not just for the feel of the train itself, but also because it causes the zone itself to have no sign of life outside of the one singular thing at a time everyone is participating in. It's hard to convey just how exhausting this can be for someone whose attention span has not yet been fried by TikTok and Short, but I'll just say this. Within your first lockout alone, you will have done all of the critical engagements and most of the fates at least once. After a few sessions in there, you'll have done each multiple times. By the time this video goes out, you'll be sick to death of literally everything. It's simply too much combat. It's also important to note that players can only talk and socialize during quiet, sometimes boring times. Eureka was only filled with conversation thanks to time spent waiting on NMs. If you're talking OC, it's because you're either actively ignoring content or griefing your rotation mid-fight. Most of the reason OC is so quiet is because there's no time or opportunity to talk, even if you wanted to. I'll spare this from too much criticism, as at this point I don't think anyone's mind can be changed on whether or not exploration zones should encourage conversation or not. However, OC was an abnormally quiet zone even by field operation standards, with minimal interaction even during week 1, even when major mechanics weren't known yet. This is in no way specific to OC though. Final Fantasy XIV as a whole just sucks for socializing while playing the game. You cannot meaningfully engage in content while also talking, as the combat's fast pace means downtime means not playing the game. This was quote-unquote solved in older MMOs, including Final Fantasy XI, as the game was far slower and had downtime integrated into the combat directly, which afforded you more chances to talk to people. Final Fantasy XIV does not have that, and everything is tailored towards never stopping until you stop playing the game. Bowser gets a reputation of being a treadmill too, but the CE there required coordination to pop, and it wasn't nearly as linear. The only time that reputation actually came close to being true was in Zadnor Zone 3 Metal Farm. An Occult Crescent is literally just, what if Bowser, but the entire thing is a Zadnor Zone 3 Metal Farm. The problem should be abundantly clear by now. It's just mindless. You are making decisions on where to go or what to do, everything is personal responsibility, and there's no reason to ever party above social life. MMOs are at their best when you meet new people, team up with them, and overcome challenges together. There is none of that in this content. You don't feel connected to the other 71 nameless people in the group, as Zerg rushes are fundamentally a lonely experience. But okay, if phantom jobs suck and the frequency of encounters is overstimulating, surely the experience of playing said encounters makes up for it. Well, what if I said the optimal strategy is to not play them at all? CEs and Fate don't have the same scaling as they do elsewhere in the game, meaning you can get full credit from your opener, and even that might be overkill. This has completely shattered any illusion of individual performance mattering at all. Party gameplay is replaced by refusing invitations to form groups and floor tanking the entire encounter while others kill the boss for you. This is kind of a tragedy of the commons situation where not everyone can do this, and as more people discover its merits, there's a good chance the content just stops functioning straight up. In spite of that, the more the content progresses, the more of this lethargic play, if you can even call it that, you'll see. Griefing in this way is strictly the most efficient way to play this zone, as you can use the AFK time to do other stuff IRL, and your individual contribution wouldn't have saved a great deal of time anyway. During my time with OC, even during my 12-hour binge on day 1 on Dynamis, I have yet to see a single CE fail. Speaking of leeching, I still haven't heard from a single person who understands Battle High. It was initially theorized that no hitting the fight gives Battle High, but sometimes it doesn't, and in other cases people who get hit or even die get Battle High. My personal theory is that if nobody did no hit or deathless, then it's given to the people that got hit or died the least times. Those being the leeches. That would explain why it's so common for players who spend more of the fight dead to get Battle High. Most likely they got hit the least times because they died in one hit, and then they also died the least times because they spent the whole fight dead and therefore only died once. But again, that's just a theory. Bullshit addressed this way better with Jules, which did not make it into OC, which is a problem. Hey, where are Jules? I thought, weren't we promised Jules in this content? The credit system isn't the only system level decision that brings down encounters though. The CEs are extremely overtuned in terms of HP and will often go through several loops of fairly boring mechanics, stretching a boring 2-minute loop over 6+ minutes, and that's with no leeches. This isn't a huge deal in and of itself, but it compounds with the never-ending treadmill feeling we discussed earlier. Not only are you doing these fights constantly, they also overstay their welcome every time. It's no wonder leeching is so common, given that the encounters got so boring so quickly. This content absolutely has a honeymoon phase, which is shorter than that of any content before it. In short, the experience of doing CEs is poorly designed, regardless of the quality of the fight. We've talked a lot about systems so far, but how about stepping even further back, to bare fundamentals? OC has 2 main currencies, gold and silver, but getting them are mutually exclusive. You get silver by doing CEs and Fate, while you get gold by grinding regular mobs. This would normally not be too big of an issue, but it compounds with the earlier problems we've discussed to make gold farming a significantly more tumultuous experience than farming silver. Fates and CEs spawn automatically. There is always one, there is always people doing them, and they're damn near impossible to fail. Gold, on the other hand, requires shouting in chat to pull people off the intuitive treadmill, hoping said players are good, and deal with arbitrary chaining restrictions based on party size. Naturally, the average player buys every silver item they need before even looking at gold. Not having a single gold coin despite having played for tens of hours is a canon event. Where do you even get gold, they'll ask, never having needed or wanted to kill a single world mob in that time. When these players do farm gold, they'll likely feel forced into it and not really enjoy the process. The mode already had little downtime, and gold farming removes the last trace of it. Unsurprisingly, we can look at Eureka once more to see this system done right. In Eureka, you farm mobs to spawn NMs. If this were copied into OC, you would be getting gold while attempting to spawn CEs, and then getting silver when you kill them. A symbiotic relationship. Eureka is far more harmonious, and its systems were brought together in a far more satisfying way, whereas OC was seemingly made without ever considering that. Enough about currency though. When I think anti-synergy, I think of these delicious fellows. Demiatma. I don't care one way or another about the drop rate, but what I do care about is that the experience of farming for them is miserable regardless of its length. The system of each Demiatma being dropped according to the region of a CE or fate makes sense in theory, but in practice strips all control and balance from the player. CEs and fates spawn randomly and are limited to one at a time, so you can't focus your grind on one type. You just have to take whatever you're given. It's also likely that the number of fates that CEs in a region impact this, with the larger zones being the ones you're more likely to overcap from. It's also possible that those in smaller zones were given a higher drop rate, but we just don't know, and the lack of transparency is harming player sentiment. As a result, if you fall behind in a certain Demiatma type, for example having 0 orange despite having 6 yellow, there's nothing you can do. Your grind should already be done, but because 3 of your Demiatma were of the wrong type, you're stuck on the treadmill still. This specific example happened to me, and it was the point at which I gave up to grind Dawn Trail Overworld Fate instead, which comes with its own set of problems that prevent me from accepting it as a real answer. For starters, having the only solution to a piece of content being poorly designed be stop doing it is an objective failstate. Secondly, I was farming for my Demiatma in Occult Crescent because I found Occult Crescent fun, and having to stop gaining EXP and currencies for a whole weekend to do Dawn Trail Fates for my last Demiatma took me completely out of it. However, I do think that even if the Demiatma step was executed a little better, I wouldn't be happy with it regardless. I believe not only that having a Demiatma step as a one-time grind gating a tombstone dump is worse than having it be a repeat step, but that both are significantly worse than having the zone itself integrate relic reward. Focusing on the 1500 tome grind specifically, it's deceptively intense, arguably more so than the Demiatma step. While you can easily argue that getting the tomes for the relic are part of your daily routines already, so it's not a grind, I would say that's only true if you already have every job already at level 100. Omni 100 this early in the expansion isn't realistic unless you're a veteran player who started Dawn Trail with every job at the previous cap of 90, or are otherwise sinking abnormally high hours into the game. So the problem I'm going to describe is a majority experience. Doing roulettes for tomes requires the player to be on a level 100 job, which means a significant chunk of EXP that could be going to your less level jobs is wasted. It looks like you're getting your relic for free as part of your daily routine, but you're actually not. You're gonna have to make up for that EXP waste at some point. And the relic round being so harsh on tomes necessitates that be done outside of roulette. In short, the time you spend outside of roulette to make up for EXP waste is your relic grind. It's a textbook case of Arlen's Law. Anyway, once again, Eureka is this done right. I know that many people don't like it when relics railroad them into one thing, so they see a tome grind as a dream come true. However, in terms of the field operations gameplay, Eureka's model was the most enriching. In Eureka, every single mob or NM you defeat is directly rewarding in a small but visible way from a very long time. You aren't truly done with Eureka until you've gotten every single relic weapon, which a good amount of even veterans from Eureka launch still haven't done. And it's for that reason that even Animos remains evergreen. In OC, however, once you have one relic, there's little further reason to play the content due to lack of in-instance relic progression. Relics aren't the only problematic reward-giving structure though. Persistent Pod, Yossi's answer to Eureka bunnies, are completely terrible now. Bunnies in Eureka provided a break between battles, and a chance at some rare and valuable loot. Here though, the pot fate is basically just some extra EXP, and the rewards from the chest they lead you to are so laughably bad that most people just click off the pot without looking for the chest. I know people who did Eureka bunnies for years, but OC is barely 2 weeks old at the time of writing this section and already nobody gives a shit about the pod. There are also randomly spawning floor chests, but they're implemented so poorly I have to wonder if whoever decided on this implementation has even played a video game in their entire lives. Basically, these chests are not random. There are exactly 8 positions where silver chests can be, and rather than having one chest move between them, all of the chests exist at once and gradually regenerate as you do other content. The end result of this is that there are now community-made maps showing the locations of every possible silver chest. Instead of running around and looking for them but struggling to find any, the gameplay of gathering them is now routing between these 8 points as fast as possible to gain far more rewards than likely intended. I believe we can reasonably conclude this based on the fact literally every possible reward in these chests has crashed in price. As a result, the previous content the loot pools drew from are made significantly worse. It's now less special and has significantly less longevity, as the items you'd farm from them are now worthless. Not to mention, the drop rates in OC are so high that before long there won't be much reason to do that for them either. Why do Eureka bunnies for Petrol or Orthos? Why do Dariata for the FF11 Raptor? Why save Bowstring clusters for Construct 14? Why do old treasure maps for their glamour? When OC can get you all that and more, much faster. Don't think OC itself is exempt either though. Everyone and their mother has that shark mount that they're charging 99 totems for some reason. This is likely another case where personal opinions will greatly differ, as many players will be happy to have easy access to something that was rare. That's fair, but as I stated earlier, something being fun and something being well designed are different topics. I enjoyed the loot vomit at first too though, but my analysis now is that thanks to this fuck up, the game actually has less content, even though they just released more content, and that is genuinely hilarious. Also, while we're on the topic of rewards, why can't you level in here? If we're willing to look past the lack of customization flaw within Phantom Jobs by saying it was to increase accessibility of the zone compared to the previous two, that accessibility is utterly wasted by removing what was objectively the main incentive of Bowser for most of its players, outside EXP. If the intention with Phantom Job streamlining was to get as many people into and doing field ups as possible by positioning OC as the start of field up, having it be optimal leveling from 81 to 100 was the way to do that. Look, I get it. People not using lost actions in Bowser was a mild annoyance, and those people were mainly the people using Bowser to level. However, not only did they remove the consumable nature and customization of lost actions to get more people to use them, but they also removed the XP gain of the zone to get the people who didn't use them out. Only one of these things had to be done, but OC overcorrected hard. Wanting OC to be a more niche zone would have seen it keep the consumable customizable lost action system, and doing away with the leveling. Where, if you wanted it to be more broadly appealing, you'd have kept the changes to the action system made with Phantom Jobs, while also keeping the ability to level. Doing neither of these implies that the devs either had no real target demographic for OC, or had no idea how to actually capture it. A common counter-argument to this notion I see is that the leveling content will instead be the Deep Dungeon in 7.35, but I categorically reject the notion that the Deep Dungeon can be a viable replacement. Most of the reasons for this call back to the failures of Eureka Orthos, and assume it was a permanent shift in design rather than a one-time misstep. I promise Eureka Orthos is relevant, stick with me here. Firstly is the EO's harsh role imbalance. The damage profile manifests as nearly harmless auto attacks and one-shot avoidables. This creates a situation where DPS are the assumed default role provided you can avoid the mechanics, as the timer won't be a struggle on them. But if you're less confident, you could go tank and potentially not be one-shot at the cost of time and flexibility. And those are the only two things that will ever impact your real choice, leaving healers as an objectively inferior set of job. After all, where is the sustain ever going to be used? Not on mechanics because they'll one-shot a healer, and not on autos because sustaining potions are already overkill on that front. A duty with such poor balance is an inadequate replacement for a field operation as leveling content. Secondly, EO's difficulty and commitment combined places it as definitively a piece of quote-unquote hardcore content. Progressing hinges on memorization of unreactable mob and boss mechanics, and this has effectively zero substance beyond that due to binary pass and fail conditions and lack of options for recovery. EO never has you asking, did I mismatch my palms or the timer? Or did I pull more than I can handle, and if so, do I have the palms to handle it? Instead, the only question is, did I dodge the one-shot? If yes, clear. If no, die. And that's without mentioning the fact that a single wipe, regardless of fault, sends you right back to the start, making meaningful progression less than feasible. While every deep dungeon devolves to this point eventually, EO is like this from moment one, meaning it also does this during the leveling step. Expecting that people will do high-end raiding to level their jobs is just completely unreasonable. You may be thinking, okay, but all of this is about the solo experience, so it doesn't affect me. I'll just do matched party. And I regret to inform you that is no longer an option. As a result of EO's design shift, once EO stopped being Flavor of the Month, the matched party function died for all deep dungeons, at least on NA, and likely isn't returning even if the Dawn Trail deep dungeon walks back what was wrong with EO. This just isn't how the Western player base approaches content anymore. As deep dungeons' leveling content seem to hinge on the assumption of a group of 4, I think this should be re-evaluated somehow for future deep dungeons if they're going to be leveling content. Or just, not make them leveling content. There's a reason people kept doing Berger till 90. There's a reason why at the start of Dawn Trail people were desperate to do 100 with Berger too. It's because EO fucking sucks. Sorry about the tangent. Looping back around to OC now, I saved the biggest thing for last. Fog Tower. The worst design system in the entire game, the biggest mistake since Diadem. By now you know me, meaning you know I'm not one for exaggeration, but you have no idea how badly I wish I was exaggerating. The spawn rooms behind the Fog Tower are like so. During auroral mirages, the weather effect, the entrance at the center of the map will activate for about 5 minutes. If 16 players put in one cipher each, everyone standing on the entrance gets let in. If more than 48 players stand on the entrance, then those who go in are randomly selected, prioritizing people who use more ciphers. Those who don't get selected get their ciphers back. Sounds innocent, right? Well, by the theory, it is not. I've seen plenty of cope that this was Square Enix's way of challenging BA's Discord culture, distancing themselves or generally mixing things up. And let me make it entirely clear that I agree with these goals in theory. So it would have been far better if Fog Tower, actually tried to do that. Unfortunately, Fog Tower's changes do not represent fixing what was wrong with BA, they represent doubling down on its worst aspect. Firstly, auroral mirages are too short. 5 minutes is too short. Usually what will happen is the entire instance will join a CE, because what else is there to do, and the weather will spawn midway. Everybody agrees to go to the tower after, but CEs are longer than 5 minutes on average. By the time people finish and start going to the tower, the weather is already over. There was no opportunity to attempt it despite more than enough players wanting to. If this only happened once or twice, I'd be like, it's whatever. But this is a regular occurrence, and the only way to avoid it is by attempting to convince the entire instance to stop playing the game, which is never in a million years going to happen. But even if it is possible to get to the entrance between CEs, going there to use your cipher means you miss the next CE. so nobody will want to do it. They've betrayed the first rule of design by not eliminating conflicting incentives. Visiting the tower is actively detrimental to the average player, so even if you're willing to not play the game for 5 minutes, there's no guarantee that others will be too. Secondly, despite being able to enter with 16 players, the first mechanic of the first encounter requires 24 players. That's right, they pulled a chaotic again as if that wasn't the worst received thing they've ever shipped. And, well, I guess it isn't anymore. The only experience any puggo will ever have, after fighting tooth and nail to convince 15 others to skip all rewards for 5 minutes to get in, is to have their limbs ripped off and force-fed to them with no chance of success whatsoever. Seeing excited new players jump into the tower and return as shells of their former selves has genuinely broken something in me. And if that wasn't enough, we've got shout chat to rub salt in the wound. These days, anyone who experiences the slightest bit of disappointment at a failed wipe or entry is actively mocked for having tried in the first place. That's before you even consider the actual difficulty of these upgrades. Mechanics are late-turn Savage difficulty, with consistency requirements pushing the overall encounter to ultimate difficulty, and the level of organization a Phantom job requires pushing it even further than that. Ultimate prog, with no control of who joins the instance with you and being forcibly disbanded over one wipe, just is not possible. That is to say, hugging Fog Tower is completely out of the question. Therefore, the only time the entry mechanic is relevant to randoms at all is when they're actively fucking with statics and discords, the only people actually capable of doing the content to begin with. That is to say, sniping discords is back, and the situation is worse than ever. Regardless of severity, the system was unacceptable then and is unacceptable now. It's awful, as it has always directly caused confrontation. The fixed group doesn't want randoms fucking over their run, and random players shouldn't feel bad about wanting to join in content they're allowed to do when it appears, because let me be clear, sniping is the intended design. Most snipers are not doing it maliciously, they're playing the game organically, as they've intended, because they think the content would be fun to try out. Those players are also single-handedly ruining efforts towards actual progression by the only people actually capable of doing it. Under Square Enix's flawed design philosophy, both of those statements coexist, which makes approaching this discourse extremely difficult. If someone was to snipe maliciously though, hypothetically, that's a lot easier. Remember that contributing more ciphers means you go up in priority, so if a hypothetical someone were extra committed, they could just, hypothetically for the sake of debate, use multiple ciphers to guarantee themselves a spot over their pre-made group. In Eureka, it was at least left to RNG. Now the snipers can pay the grief. It's like no one at Square actually used a brain cell to think of how the community would actually do this content, or how its systems would be abused, especially right off the back of Chaotic, which was also Discord content. Making content that's even more Discord, yet expecting it not to be Discord, gives the impression that the designers at Square are severely out of touch. In short, the people to blame for your sniping woes are not the snipers killing your runs, or the Discords accusing you of being one. The people to blame are Square Enix themselves. My final thought on Occult Crescent is that I can't possibly accept this as the best of both Eureka and Bozja that it was pitched as. The OC we received is the opposite. OC wasn't just a mangled mess of horrible design, it was a cold and calculated reproduction of every flaw of Eureka and Bozja, amplified tenfold with none of the merit, while also devaluing the content it was based on. The progression is greatly lacking. Phantom Job's system is very dull and restrictive while also being inferior to what we had in FF5 itself. There's no room to socialize, the speed of the CE treadmill is exhausting, the lack of cooldown on return eliminates all threat outside of the encounters. The chests destroy all the rewards of old content. Damming out the system is universally hated. Not having EXP limits the amount of people willing to try it. And finally, Fork Tower is the worst piece of design in all of gaming. When game design is done right, non-critics usually won't notice. Instead, it would just feel right to them. It's only when something similar is done horribly that the masses can realize they were taking Peak for granted. Look, I'm not gonna say Eureka was universally loved content. If you didn't have fun with it, I can understand why, but that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Most criticism of Eureka hinges on the false pretense called out at the start, that something being fun and well designed are the same thing. I hope that with today's knowledge, maybe Eureka can be reanalyzed in retrospect and appreciated a little bit more. For now, I'd like to make an aside about poor performance and serviceability, which has been a problem since the start of Dawn Trail, but only worsens the more time passes. While it would be easy to say, people are lagging and DCing all the time, please fix, and leave it at that. Instead, I'll be discussing two specific failure points that break the game in a more figurative sense. And I know you're thinking it, but don't say it works on your machine as if that's a reasonable defense for this, as these problems have been happening to console players too, and the cause is bad servers. The first of these failure points is animation delay, which, as the name would imply, is when despite an attack happening and registering, its animation doesn't play right away. While annoying, this can usually be played around, unless the attack in question is a knockback or forced movement, because when an action moves you, that movement is tied to its animation. I have some examples of ways this can fuck you over here. The first of these is Wing Mark from M6S, which is a mechanic that has the player aim a knockback into a small corner of the arena, then quickly adjust into partners or light parties within that corner. At least, that's how the mechanic should work in theory. One problem with that is if you have animation delay, it's possible for you not to get knocked back. This causes you to instantly die and potentially cause a party wipe if you're a healer or if it's partners. Alternatively, even if you do get knocked back, the animation lock may persist longer than it should and prevent you from adjusting. While pre-aiming is possible, there's a reason this isn't relied on because it's really fucking hard. Even if you're trying to pre-aim, the inability to adjust will often either kill you outright or cause a party wipe. Now you might be thinking, well that's savage, surely this matters way less in low-end content, and I regret to inform you that it does not. Introducing our second example, Shadow Lord, the final boss from the Juno Alliance raid. Partway through, he has a phase where he makes the arena into this weird square with an unsafe center, similar to Hippocampus in Asphodorus. During this, he'll do 4 knockbacks sequentially, in line with each line of the square. However, despite appearing as an arena hazard, these knockbacks are actually boss relative. The reason this poses an issue is because if you have animation delay, it's likely that the boss will turn before the knockbacks are done, which will fling you in completely the wrong direction, probably into the wall. It gets worse than simply causing your death though. Trade cards CE from Occult Crescent have the ability to softlock the game. Its main mechanic can show up as one of 3 colours: red for pyretic, blue for deep freeze, or green for a shell that functions nearly identically to Wingmark. Green is our problem mechanic. Usually animation delayed mechanics are still shown in order, however this shell is extremely deprioritized. Meaning if you have animation delay, you can be stuck in its animation even though the rest of the fight is still happening in around you. And in extreme cases, this animation lock can persist indefinitely. Sometimes the fight will deal enough damage to kill you, but if it doesn't, then the only other method of escape is to turn off your internet and force disconnect. The second main failure point is the lack of client authority within action interaction, which causes some less than ideal behavior under server instability. The first example of this is action ghosting and action rollback. Those are when actions you used and saw feedback for either don't register or are rejected by the server respectively. These ended up very annoying as Black Mage during M6S add. As many of you will know, Black Mage currently uses a transpose line as its standard AoE rotation. This means that, were Freeze to Ghost ever, the Black Mage would be stuck in AF1 with no MP, potentially preventing further action for 5 seconds until transpose comes back. The reason why I name M6S as the specific example here is that you are doing that rotation a lot, and even a single failure on the server side can result in wipe in progression scenarios where you're not overgeared. Lag can also impact actions by providing no feedback despite hits being registered. Running counter to intuition, combos can actually be continued without that feedback, but only for combos whose hits are on different buttons such as Royal Authority, by just pressing the buttons you would have normally. However, single button combos such as Atonement cannot be continued. Pressing Atonement twice would be 2 of the first hit after all, which is theoretically impossible, so the server won't accept the second hit. You'll need to wait for the server to give feedback on the Atonement input in order for Supplication to appear, before you can use a second hit. While both of those can be mitigated somewhat by just wait for the feedback all of the time, that is generally inadvisable as it results in significant GCD downtime, and will sometimes even be impossible. For cases like Technical Step and Ninjutsu, where actions must be input within a strict time limit, waiting would mean that you just can't use that action. For example, let's say you're using Technical Step, and the server is taking 2.5 seconds per action to provide feedback. If you were to wait for feedback between each action, there wouldn't be enough time during Technical Steps to put 15-second window for enough input to do a quadruple technical finish, only a triple. Under the same conditions, 3-step ninjutsu such as the Essential Suiton would also be impossible, and as a result, players are left with no choice but to blindly trust their input, without feedback. Usually I wouldn't talk at all about the main story, but in a surprising turn of events, I actually kinda care about it. I'll not go in depth into analysis here, but I will leave you with a theory for the near future. Alex's knowledge of other reflections, including knowing his own as the Knife, as well as his fascination with the Adam Crystal, greatly interests me. I think it's not impossible that in 7.3 he ends up escaping to the Shard, which sets him up as the primary antagonist for 8.0. After all, the 13th being a shard where nothing truly died because it's so fucked up from all the darkness sounds like a great reason for someone obsessed with transcending death to want to go there. Plus, it would give Sphene a strong motive to go after him, and tie back into the Endwalker patches to potentially make them more forgivable in retrospect. There's still a major problem with the MSQ structure though, and that is the need for trials every patch due to lack of a trial series. I understand the appeal of theming the trials similarly to MSQ, and the mini-arc we got in the Endwalker patches wouldn't have worked without the trials, but Zilenia, despite being a very fun trial on both difficulties, felt egregiously forced story-wise. It started by literally ripping us from the rest of the story, then the fight itself was largely inconsequential, then it ended with us being put back where we were like nothing ever happened. Like, I'm sorry, but this was not even trying to hide the fact that it's filler. Trial Vidral was a largely unexplored concept and also felt like the easy and intended setup for a trial series, so I'm very confused at why the decision was made to not have one. The given reason of increasing excitement in the MSQ was not met, and the lack of a trial series was near universally hated in Endwalker, so I simply cannot fathom why they made this decision. We're done with content discussion now, but before we go into discussion of impact, I'd like to make a quick clarification for the people who've skipped directly to this point. This criticism is not coming from hatred, and I am not blind to the merits of its content. As stated in the preamble, when I call this content bad, I mean that on a design level. As for the merit, they all come with ifs or buts, and the merits get plenty of coverage, so focusing on those ifs and buts is what sets my coverage apart from those of other creators. At no point do I want to give the impression that my subjective opinion is that I hate it. In fact, I don't. I had fun this patch, and I hope you did too. But if you didn't, you would be far from alone in that. From my graveyard of a friends list, to the sound of my pins dropping from my link shells, and every FC I'm in direct contact with failing to fill its event, to even my close friends considering quitting, actually quitting, or questioning me on why I haven't. The silence speaks louder than words ever could and tells me sentiment remains at an all-time low. I just want to say that I have no bad blood whatsoever towards any single individual on the development team here. However, the most likely reason player sentiment is so low in English-speaking communities is that the development team has not given the impression that they are trying to meet the needs of Western players, despite them being verifiably the majority of the player base. That's the main thought left in my mind after seeing the flaws in this content be so obvious and so avoidable. It's hard to sum up said sentiment without sounding malicious, but I will try my very best. Everything about this patch screams rushed job. They desperately needed all of this, Starpawn especially, to last for over a year as they know they have nothing else of substance to ship until 7.55, potentially even 8.25 if North Holland sucks too. That's all assuming good faith from the dev team at Square Enix though. However, I've seen theories that Occult Crescent could have been released as a PSYOP and its failure was intended from the very start. Make it bad enough and players will hate field ops categorically, giving them an excuse to never make one again. This is reinforced by the fact that everything about Occult Crescent that could have been fucked up was fucked up to the point that it goes beyond just being bad and into being good at being bad. It's basically the 7.0 Black Mage of content. This also means that effectively 3 years of dev resources disappeared into livestream. Where did they go? Definitely not into anything with Sin and Dawn Trail, that's for sure. At this point, I wouldn't fault anyone for believing that Final Fantasy XIV was reduced to a skeleton crew. Just enough power to work on the bare minimum of extra content, but not enough to address growing pains. In fact, I kinda need this to be true because the thought of this patch being the result of a fully staffed, well-funded team that was actually trying to make it good fills me with genuine dread for the game's future. Anyway, that's all for today. In short, the situation is dire and I really, really want to hope things can get better. It's hard, but I do. Thank you so much for watching. A lot of time went into scripting this, so if you've made it this far, please consider leaving your thoughts in the comments. My feed delivers them to me from all over my channel, regardless of how old the video is. If you'd like to keep up to date with future content, subscribing with notifications on or joining Linkstell on Discord are the best ways. I have Throne too if you'd prefer a more direct method of support. All of that will be linked in the description. Thanks again, and I hope our meeting can be on better terms next time.
Such devastation! This was not my intention! We'll send cavalry in there at once!